I just want to like drive that point home. Like, this isn't normal. This isn't evolutionary. This is not how men are. This is not how women are. But that's the system we've been made to believe is a norm. And it goes all the way back to that time. And I think I'm highlighting here this like individual personality and needs and wants don't matter. This is how it ties into sex positivity, right? It's like, if we're looking at the world through a sex positive lens, your individuality does matter. You don't have to fit into the male stereotype. You don't have to fit into the female stereotype. You can be whoever you want. All right, hello everyone. You are listening to Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it.
Damn right.
So today's episode, this is our first episode, and how we wanted to kick it off was talking about the history of sex positivity, what it even means, what's the origin story of that term, and also talking about the intersection between feminism and the patriarchy and all of the above. So lots of cool stuff that we're going to talk about. And so really, I guess, first question that I want to answer is, what is sex positivity? And so, you know, it's a social movement that celebrates healthy sexual relationships. It recognizes there are many different types of sexuality and different types of relationships that you can have. And it's really meant to empower all of us to have whatever sex life we want to do it healthily, safely, and consensually. And sex positivity is radical. And so when I say radical, I mean challenging all of the social norms that we have grown to know and believe. And if we like something sexually, it's worth asking, why do I like that? Is that because that's how we've been conditioned, or do I genuinely want that thing, right? Yeah. And so there's a lot to sex positivity, but if I could sum it up, that's probably how I would do it.
I agree. And just to tell our listeners, who are you, Ms. Lindsay?
Oh, yeah. Great question. My name is Lindsay Murray, and I'm a certified sex therapist, and I have a private practice in DFW, Texas area. And so I see a lot of couples, I see individuals as well. But a lot of the work I do, I guess, is rooted in relationships and relationship dynamics. But with that comes the aspect of sexuality and intimacy. And what does that mean for you in the context of whatever type of relationship you have? I help people navigate that and help them grow closer together. So
perfect, guys. Yeah. And then just a little bit about me, the second voice on here. I'm Denise Stratton. I'm just going to be your average Joe listener who's going to be here learning along with you. And yeah, as far as sex positivity defined, I did a little research myself. And so the definition that I got from Wikipedia was, because Wikipedia is, you know, the research of the internet. Sex positive movement is defined as a social or philosophical movement that sexuality is natural and a positive aspect of human life and should be embraced and celebrated without shame or judgment. So similar, the things that I basically learned that pretty much are in your summary is that as far as sex positivity, it embraces safe sex practices, which I loved. It also embraces different sexual lifestyles and even even like your relationship to your body, your specific relationship to your sexual identity. And then it also encourages sexual pleasure, which is awesome. And then also advocates for sex education, which I think to me is the most important of it all. Right.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of places don't have comprehensive sex education. I know in Texas we don't.
No.
So for a lot of my couples that come in for sex therapy, early on part of my assessment is asking them questions about childhood and sex education and where they learned about sex and what they learned and first sexual experiences. And I really go into kind of a holistic deep dive with them. And I would say most, if not all of them, when I ask, hey, what sex education did you get? I saw a Playboy magazine and my dad's like, you know, it's like, yeah, there's none. There's none. Or it's like, if it was at school, it was a video on reproduction. So it was like an hour in the afternoon, here's a video on reproduction. here's what a period is, and like we're moving on.
Yeah.
So there is not comprehensive sex
That's
education.
much my sex education here in Texas. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also to just abstain. Abstain. And I'm like, teenagers are not abstaining. They are having sex. They're fucking, right? Yeah. So there's just not, it's not there. So I know here it's really a problem.
Yes.
And teen pregnancies are going to happen more and more. This is what the data shows. It happens more the less sex education you have. So sex positivity is very pro education, which I think is great, and hopefully Texas can get on board one day and be open to that.
No promises, guys, but I hope. But yeah, as far as sex positivity, like, do you know anything as far as like where did it start? Like, how did we get there, or how did we get here?
It really goes all the way back to like the 1920s. So it goes way back, and so I'm gonna give a little history on that. Something I do want to talk about real fast as we kick this podcast off is this podcast is for everybody, but I'm particularly talking to men here. I want men to listen to this. I want them to learn from this. I want them to feel supported. The reason I'm specifically kind of pinpointing men in this conversation is because for me, in my experience, usually if I'm talking about sex and I'm mentioning feminism is involved, a lot of men want to dip out because they feel like the conversation is going to be anti-men, right? And I want everyone to know that feminism and sex positivity is not anti-men. It's actually pro-men. It's anti, sexual abuse and toxic masculinity and all that. But men can learn from this too. Their sexuality matters too. And so I really just want to throw that out there, that everything we're going to talk about is not going to be just about how men are harmful. There's a lot of harm in the world, and it's not like pinpointed to men. So throwing that out there, want the men to listen and feel supported as we do this.
No, I completely agree. For you listeners out there, guys, the prompt was basically explain the history of the sex positive movement and how it impacts men. Now, when I was doing the research, I could easily find the history of the sex positive movement. When I typed in sex positive movement, men, impacts on men, anything to do with men, nothing, crickets. So I'm really excited that we're tackling this subject, because from what I did deep dives, couldn't find anything.
Yeah, you really can't.
No.
It's not really out there. And when we get into feminism, we'll talk about a lot of it is in that context, right? So we're gonna get to it, but the history of the term sex positivity and where it began, like I said, started in the 20s, and I'm going to kick it off by talking about Sigmund Freud.
Oh, okay.
So he was a neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis. So his work, he came up with psychosexual development. And so he just did a lot of work around people's like unconscious memories and sexual fantasies and what people's sexual development is. And there's a term called polymorphous perversity. I have not heard that before, so I am literally reading that from the paper.
That's a big word.
Yeah, but it's really about like sexual gratification outside of normative sexual behavior. So he did some work around that. The distinct developmental phases of oral, anal, and then phallic. So he did a lot of work in that realm, that kind of a founder of that type of work, right? And so I want to talk about Freud real quick, because one of the people who studied under him, his name is Wilhelm Reich. He's credited as like coming up with the term sex positivity, but he worked under Freud. And Freud was doing some weird shit, okay? Like, so was Wilhelm Reich. Like,
it was the 20s. So,
it's the 20s. Like, at the time, it's kind of like they're a product of their time. So at the time, maybe it made sense. Looking back now, kind of like, holy shit, right? You would not want to be doing this stuff. Part of Freud's work was free association, which is kind of like stream of consciousness. It's like talking whatever is on your mind with no boundaries. And he really tapped a lot into like the unconscious memories. And something he found, or that he really researched, because he used hypnosis in his practice for a while, and people would have memories, I'm putting air quotes around that, but would have like memories of sexual abuse as children. And the question really was, is that a real memory or is that some kind of sexual fantasy that's coming up? Because it's like part of your unconscious mind, right?
Interesting.
And he would have them recreate whatever memory popped up in present time. And a lot of his patients empathetically were able to say, like, I don't think I was actually abused. I think there's just like some fantasy there. But lots of interesting work around that. And I say it was weird stuff because like now in present time, when I think of my practice and my work, I would not want to have a client go and recreate some kind of memory. Right. No. Like you wouldn't want them to do that. And so, yeah, just really interesting stuff. And so Wilhelm Reich was a medical doctor, but also psychoanalytic practitioner in Vienna. And he worked under Freud. And he had a series of papers called Orgastic Potency, which is really meaning like the ability to release emotions from your body through the power of an orgasm. So yeah, interesting, right? He did a lot of work around, or a lot of research around like libido and orgasm and how orgasm is positive, like sexual pleasure is positive. It can help with your health, right? Which is true. It is true. If you're able to embrace your body and embrace your sexuality and receive what you like to receive, and you have a really powerful orgasm, it does, I mean, the data shows, it does make you happier. It makes you like who you are more. It makes you, just kind of lowers depression, anxiety. But where it got really weird with Wilhelm Reich, he also wrote a book called The Function of the Orgasm in 1927. So what I'm about to say about him gets a little weird, but he is very important as far as the history of sex positive movement and then research around libido and orgasm. So he wrote that book in 1927 and eventually moved to New York in 1939. Before he moved to New York, he was already... So the work he was doing was very weird, very radical. And again, at the time, I'm trying to think like in the context of the time.
Oh, yeah.
But he was basically saying that Freud's idea of libido is this biological or cosmic energy that he could physically see. And so he created this box. I don't know, I can't remember what he called the box, but he like created this box where people could sit in and he would swear that this biological cosmic energy, which is libido, would like radiate through your body and like cure cancer and reduce tumors, like all the above.
Interesting. Wow.
Which is not true. If you have an orgasm, it feels great. It's not going to cure your cancer if you have cancer. So really putting out a lot of false claims and creating a lot of harm. That's really harmful to say. So when he was doing all that while he was in Vienna, so when he moved to New York, the FBI was already surveillancing him because they knew how radical he was. They knew what kind of harm he was doing. And he ended up getting arrested at some point, maybe like in the 40s, because when he moved to the U.S., he didn't have a medical license in the U.S., but he was still practicing as a medical practitioner.
Problematic, yes.
Very problematic. And people were complaining to the medical board about him.
Of course, yeah.
As they should have been. So, yeah, he ended up doing some really fucked up shit. But needless to say, still a brilliant guy.
Yeah.
And really, really kicked us off on embracing sexual pleasure and that term, sex positivity.
No, apologies on going on a tangent a little bit, but I absolutely love diving into medical history specifically just because, or even scientific history, just because the people who paved the way that we credit to being these brilliant, awesome, very smart, talented people who gave us the education we have today, right? They did things that if we were to do those things today is cray-cray. Or the medical industry in general, scientific industry, we've been wrong so many times. Like around this time of 20s, 30s, 40s, as a queer lady, it was considered a mental illness. Yeah. Right? So like I would be insane by those concepts. Or if we go down the medical industry, I know way back when we used to treat acne with x-rays. Not thinking about the cancer that we're shooting into this person's face.
Yes.
Right. So unfortunately, a lot of bad shit has to happen for breakthroughs to happen, it seems like, as far as...
Yes, which is like the unfortunate part.
Unfortunate.
You know, it's unfortunate, but at the same time, it makes sense. It's like they're going based off the data they have at the time. And it's hard to find that line between do they think they're being helpful or are they knowingly harming clients and patients? I don't know
In
what
the
they
name
were.
of science.
Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking at the time. But, you know, going back to Freud a little bit, I mean, there's all those jokes about like Sigmund Freud and like using cocaine. And that is true. I mean, he thought cocaine could solve a lot of problems, both mental and medical illnesses. And he used
to
it
be a cough
yes.
treatment, didn't it? Like cocaine used to be something.
And I think they've also said it used to be like in Coke, like the drink. It used to be, I mean,
it's true.
So it's wild because he used it himself and at some point stopped. But, you know, it just makes you think, like, at what point did they realize cocaine may not be a medicine, right? This may not be okay.
So as a professional in this industry, do you ever wonder, what am I doing now that is going to be maybe looked at as not okay in the future? Does that ever cross your mind?
Every day.
Oh, really? Okay.
Literally every day. I think to be a really good clinician, whether it's therapy, medical field, physical therapist, all the above, you always have to be looking at that because what you're doing now is you may not have all the data, right? Like anytime there's research and someone talks about data, like, oh, the data shows, and I'm like, but how small was that pool? You know, if we're talking about 100 people, it's like, that's a tiny pool compared to like general population. And so anytime a method or a theory or way to do my work, if someone says it works and here's the effect, I still have to be really cautious of that because people are so complex. Everyone is different. Like, you know, I go to therapy and what works for me may not work for you. It may cause you harm. I mean, I don't know. And so for me personally, I'm always doing new trainings.
Good.
I'm always attending consultation groups. I'm always researching. I'm always trying to be as up to date as I can with the work and the language that seems to be working more than like outdated methods. And so that's where you have to really be careful. Like, I know in my field, I guess in every field, experience matters, right? But sometimes there's that tipping point where someone has so much experience that they stop getting up to date because they're so comfortable.
Their cup is full.
Yeah, their cup is full and comfortable. And, you could have a clinician who's been doing it for 30 years and they're using methods that have been proven not to be so effective. And that's what they're sticking to.
No, I absolutely love that you're adapting because I feel like adapting to the differences or the new data is good because even in the queer community, queer used to be a bad word. It used to be. So it's taking me a really long time to use that word effectively when in fact the language I was using before I used to call everyone gay, which is still a good umbrella term. Yeah. But when you use the word gay, it can get confusing where the younger crowd typically they use queer, they use LGBTQ now. So adapting is good.
Yes, absolutely.
Speaking of adapting, so 1920s, 1940s, is that where you're
Yeah, so I guess where sex positivity becomes more of a common term in the U.S. really starts with feminism and female liberation in the 60s. So it's kind of a timeline progression, right?
When I was doing the research, I did see William's name, but literally only, it seemed like there was a big gap from William in 1920s, and then it's like nothing until the 60s and 70s where it seems like we had like a little bit of a cultural shift in like the way we were thinking. And fun fact, guys, the 60s and 70s, for you people who aren't like history people, is technically that time is known as the sexual liberation of the USA, which I thought was awesome.
Because I think Wilhelm Reich, I want to say, because, you know, he came to New York in 1939, and it might have been like the late 40s or early 50s when he was arrested, and then like liberation started in the 60s, and so it is a gap, but not when you put it all together, not quite as big. And so I don't know how far his reach, really got.
I'm sure him getting arrested probably didn't help the cause as well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So, with feminism, there's different waves, right? And so like first wave feminism was late 19th century, early 20th century. That's when women got the right to vote. So that's kind of like first wave feminism.
Okay.
Probably didn't look at all like it looks like today. But back then, huge deal for women to be able to vote. And then second wave was like liberation in the 60s, which I have a lot more to say about that time. But then in like the early 90s, there's the third wave feminism, which was really focused on like individuality and diversity. And then there's a possible fourth wave, not really official, but in 2012 when the Me Too movement came out. And that was about like combating sexual abuse and violence against women and rape culture. So that's a big, like, I think when people talk about feminism now, whenever it's in a negative way, like, oh, you're a feminist, what kind of bullshit is that? Like, fuck you. People are referring really to when the Me Too movement started, but it's come in waves and it's evolved to what it is now. In, 60s, early 70s, during that second wave, like sexual liberation, it's very interesting because feminism was very polarized in that time. There were sex positive feminists, sex negative feminists.
I read that.
And it was really rooted in the opinion about porn.
Yeah. Okay.
You read about that?
Yeah. That blew my mind.
It was called the Feminist Sex Wars. And
which, guys, as a lesbian, that sounds really nice. But okay, keep going.
You're like, I'm all about it. Just very interesting because there was like this side that, they're the ones that were called like sex negative feminists, anti-porn.
Yes.
And I think it was because they viewed porn is very like derogatory against women, and there's like violence against women within that. And some of that is, I'm going to give you my opinion on it. And again, I wasn't alive in the 60s and 70s, but I am pro porn.
Okay.
But I'm pro ethical porn.
Okay. I agree.
Ethical porn meaning women or men, but I'm going to talk about women here, like are not being exploited. They're not being abused. They're not at risk. They're taking precautions to lower the risk of STDs. And the actors in porn are inclusive, Black people, people of color, Indigenous people, queer people, trans individuals, and disabled people. All the above are involved in the porn. So ethical, I'm pro that. But there is porn out there that is exploitive and
definitely
dangerous, and women may not really be consenting to the videos that are being put out there. So you have a problem with all that. So there was like that group. There was that group that was very explicitly like, no porn at all is ever okay. And then you had the quote unquote sex positive feminists who were like, porn is okay and should be allowed because it is a female expression of sexuality and we should not be shutting that down, right? So very interesting how polarized they were at the time.
Yeah, no, literally in my research, I have written down here basically that the anti-pornography feminists, they held the belief that porn was the objectification of women's bodies and it fostered the idea of sexual violence and assault, right? Which I get. I'm there. I'm with you. I understand. However, I do agree with the sex positive feminists. And it seems like the sex negative feminists kind of emerged the sex positive feminists. Like that's what caused us to kind of come out of the woodwork and be like, no, porn's okay as long as we do it our way, right?
Yeah.
But one thing that sex positive feminists made a point of that I really, really related to, and I have it written down here, is that they emphasize the importance of women's rights to explore their bodies, their sexual desires, and they believed, and this is the important one for me, that the discourse on women's sexual pleasure being silenced and marginalized in today's world is a bad thing.
Yes.
And I completely agree with that.
I totally agree too. 100%.
Yeah, because to me, suppressing the dialogue of sex just in general in the guise of protecting women makes it seem like we need protecting, I guess. I don't know. Like,
yeah. It's kind of like
making us weaker almost.
Right. Well, it's kind of like the only way to protect women is by shutting down their sexuality. Yeah. And I have a problem with that.
I agree.
I have a problem with that. Okay. I don't think that's right. And, what I wanted to say about like sexual liberation and where people really get it twisted. while I am pro-sexual liberation, in a way, it has harmed women too. And let me tell you why I think that.
Okay.
And by the way, I should have mentioned this earlier. Some of the information I'm talking about, I've gathered from multiple sources, and we'll have the source material in the episode description. So everything, if I'm pulling from some source, it's going to be listed in there because I want to give credit to those who have put this into words better than I could, right? But the reason why I think liberation has harmed females is because feminism at its core is about consent and respect.
Agreed.
And I think that's what people don't understand. I think feminism is viewed as like anti-men and like fuck men and all men are the way. And it's like, I do not agree whatsoever. Mm-hmm. It is about consent and respect, which men deserve too, okay? When sexual liberation started, and even today, I think the patriarchy has redefined it as like, liberation is the freedom to express your sexuality, to be sexual, to have as much sex as you want, to dress however you want, to be in public and be yourself. I think the patriarchy has really spun that into, well, if feminism is about consent and women are sexually liberated, that means women are always sexually available, which means men now have like full access to sex anytime that they want. That's really what's happened. Like if you ever hear, well, she shouldn't have been dressed that way. She was asking for it. It's kind of like their freedom means that's like an unsaid consent. I can have that.
Yeah, it drives me
when
insane.
that is not what liberation is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, I can express myself however I want to. I can show skin if I want to. That doesn't mean you get to just come and take me. You still have to respect me. You still have to get consent from me.
Agreed.
Every single time.
Agreed.
And in relationships, that is important because I think people have this misconception that, well, we're in a relationship. Do I really need to get consent every time? I'm like, yes, you need to get it every single time. Mm-hmm. And when you're in a long-term relationship, that doesn't mean you have to have a conversation. Oh, yeah, I consent. It doesn't mean that. But it's just, even when you're with someone in a committed relationship, you can tell when they're comfortable and when they're not. Mm-hmm. And you need to make sure they're comfortable every single time.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
Yeah. So the liberation movement is supposed to be positive. It has not always helped women. It's really, depending on the context, kind of put women behind a little bit, more at risk of harm.
Oh no, and that's what I was finding too. Like, it seems like over time, women started becoming classified as sexually passive, right? And then, which automatically classifies men, you guys out there, as being sexually aggressive.
Yes.
So, especially in heterosexual sex, it seems like the roles are the woman should submit to the man's needs, is what I've seen.
Yes.
Or not seen, but researched, read. Unfortunately, that's been something that's been hard for us to overcome as a society.
On that note, that kind of leads me into my next point, or maybe really where I'm going with this, because I mentioned I want to talk about the patriarchy and the intersection of that here, right? Patriarchy, I'm going to get a little bit of history on it, but it harms men too. I think you'll usually hear, I think this is a misconception about feminism too. Like feminism is just a bunch of women saying, fuck the patriarchy. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, I'm saying that on a normal basis, like, yeah, fuck the patriarchy, but it hurts men too. Men have not benefited from the patriarchy, and that's what I mean by like radical. Is like I'm always trying to think like if there's some kind of context that is harmful, but someone seems to be okay with it, or they seem to benefit from it, it does pose the question, is this really what you want, or is this conditioned, right? Is this power dynamic like conditioned? And this is what we've been used to. And I'm going to give some history, and I might tie it back into the feminism because I want to speak to why feminism benefits men. And it does.
I agree.
Like, the equality between sexes benefits men too. So patriarchy going many, many, many years back, okay? So patriarchy was not always a thing. There was a point in time when women were working too. They were working in agriculture. They had leadership positions. They were equal partners in the home and all of that, right? But I'm going to go back to about 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, which is like, where
Wow, that was back.
Way back then, which now is like where Iraq and Syria and Turkey, like that area. The reason why I'm mentioning that location is because they have found artifacts. They call them like tablets, but it's like their language writing in the stone and the tablets is where they're getting all this information from of like how things worked back then. But, you know, things were more equal. And then about 5,000 years ago in that area, the elite powers, the people who are really, really in power, I guess at some point realized that true power is like power over people. And so they really needed people to provide a surplus of resources for them to do whatever they wanted to do. And so instead of having everyone work equally like it had been going, you know, those select few in power were like, instead of us doing it, let's just have everyone else, you know, come up with a surplus of resources for us. And so they put people into two categories, literally male, female. Men were the ones that had to defend their state, go to war, right?
Yes.
And there was also an issue with reproduction. Like they needed to keep producing more people to increase the population so they can have more sons that are going off to fight and defend their state, and then more women and girls to do like the domestic duty. So it really started this separation of here's what men do and here's what women do. Women have the babies, they do the domestic duties. And women were really disappearing from those leadership positions and working in agriculture, dwindling away.
I honestly didn't even know that women had leadership positions back then.
So it hasn't always been a thing, right? And not every country or culture is patriarchal.
Yeah.
Here in the U.S. it is. So women are dwindling away from those positions. And then, you know, men are going off to fight in the war and doing all the manly stuff. As this is like a perfect example of how the patriarchy harms men. Because I even think of like U.S. citizens going to war in the draft. It was all men. It was like you could not say no. You had to, if you were called to the draft, you had to go.
Yeah.
It really what that did is it put a lot of pressure on families because the family system is now broken. We're not an equal household.
No.
You know, women are now extremely marginalized, right? Because they're pushed down into this position. And when you have a bunch of women who are marginalized, and let's say they're having daughters, and the daughter's expectation is when you get old enough, you have to get married, so you're moving away from your family to marry your husband, and you're probably like pretty young when that happens. So this period of time really broke families apart. And then when you think about, you know, splitting people into two, male, female, here's what men do, here's what women do, because that's going to benefit our society. Everyone's individual needs, attributes, desires don't fucking matter. I don't really care about who you are. I don't give a shit about what you really want to do with your life. You're going to do this because this is what men do. You're going to do this because this is what women do. Think about it. It's like at that time and even now, if men's expectation is to go to war and they don't want to, they're going to be mocked as a failure. Like, you're a pussy. You have to go. If women don't want to have children, well, what the fuck is wrong? What's your purpose then? What are you doing? Right. Like, it's still like, it's like your individual needs and wants don't matter. You're in these categories.
Agreed. Yeah.
And like, I think what happens even today that I want people to realize, and this is where like I think the radicalness comes in. The elite, the few people with the most power, make us all believe that this is the norm. This is evolutionary. This is how men are. This is how women are. That is not true. They want you to believe that it's normal because it benefits them. And that's the same with everything, with racism, with classism, with sexism, with everything.
Yeah.
Those few in power who benefit from these gender stereotypes, they benefit from it. And they want you to think, no, this is like normal. This is how it is. And that's why it's not a problem. So when you fight back against this patriarchal system, the reason those few in power get so upset is because if we win and we push back and we break this system, they lose all the power that they've had.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. So it's really like, I just want to like drive that point home. Like, this isn't normal. This isn't evolutionary. This is not how men are. This is not how women are. But that's the system we've been made to believe is a norm. And it goes all the way back to that time. And I think I'm highlighting here this like individual personality and needs and wants don't matter. This is how it ties into sex positivity, right? It's like if we're looking at the world through a sex positive lens, your individuality does matter. You don't have to fit into the male stereotype. You don't have to fit into the female stereotype. You can be whoever you want.
No, I feel, and I will never speak for men, but what I will speak to as a queer lady, as someone who has pursued women, which I've done. So guys, I kind of relate to you on that. I've pursued women myself. And it gets really confusing trying to fit that little box of, okay, I should be pursuing women. I should be the aggressor. I should be the person who goes out and plants one on you if, I'm feeling the vibe.
Really with all of this, with feminism, with consent, with respect, is the freedom to be honest about what you want and what you don't want.
I love the way you put that. Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Because I think people are afraid to be that honest. And this harms men too. Like, for example, and I'm kind of tying in like why feminism is not bad. It's actually good for men. Kids will hear, don't cry like a girl.
Yeah.
Toughen up. You're the guy, you got it, whatever. Women a lot of times won't speak up because a lot of times women and girls are made to feel like they're overreacting, they're being dramatic, they're going to burden someone if they do speak up.
Oh, yeah.
And so that gets really hard, right? Like if you're wanting to say no to something, but you're really scared of what the person's reaction is going to be and maybe put you in more harm, you can kind of freeze up and like you don't know what to do. But on the flip side, men don't always speak up either because they don't want to be a pussy.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't talk about our feelings.
We don't talk about our feelings. I'm not going to say no to that. Or even men will experience a sexual assault, rape, harassment, but they don't want to be a pussy. They don't want to speak up about it. Like, oh, it wasn't really that big of a deal. And I'm like, no, that was a huge fucking deal. That was not okay. Like men are assaulted and raped too.
I was about to say, yeah, but I feel like saying that a man is raped, a lot of people think that's a myth or that doesn't happen or that's not, how is that possible?
Right.
Or things like that. So it seems like I feel bad, again, for men because it seems like their feelings completely get pushed aside because they're not supposed to have them.
Totally get pushed aside. And I've seen it in my practice plenty of times. And this is how it really harms men. Men are more susceptible to anger being the only emotion that they show. And I'm not even saying anger is bad. We all can be angry. There's certain situations where, we should be angry. But when that's the only emotion that you can show, it can really scare their partner. It can push their partner further away. And what do you think that does to men? It causes them more distress. It makes them feel less supported, more likely to act out, more likely to be depressed. Their mental health really matters a lot too. And when I go back to, men having to go to war, I think it's pretty sad that they didn't have a say in that, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So this is how, like, when feminism, which again, if we're just changing the language, it's about consent, it's about respect, and it's about the ability to be, it's like the opportunity to be honest. Men deserve that too. And when they start to realize that, their health improves, their relationships improve, they feel more supported. And the data shows that. So there's a huge benefit there. This is so random and out of left field. And then maybe not out of left field, it's kind of something you said, but have you ever heard of the term arousal non-concordance?
No.
Okay.
It's a big word too, guys.
Yeah, arousal non-concordance. I'm thinking of, when men are raped and people are like, how could that be?
Yeah.
Because if they're raped, how can they have an erection? Is like usually the question, right?
I see. Okay.
And people will think, well, if you have an erection, that means you were into it. Not true. Okay. And arousal non-concordance is basically when your mind and your body don't align. So let's say it goes both ways. Your mind could be desiring sex, but your body's not aroused yet. Maybe it'll eventually get aroused. It's not aroused yet, right? And then same on the flip side, your mind doesn't want sex at all, which is like if you're in the middle of a rape, your mind is wanting to get out of that situation. Of
course, yeah.
I'm not safe, and you're having whatever trauma response you're having, your body could still get aroused. So it's basically this misalignment of like what my body's doing and what my mind is doing. And the way they studied this for men was the participants in the study, they would go in this room and they would sit in a chair, whatever, and there would be a screen. It would play different kinds of porn, different kinds of like sexually explicit material. And the device would be like connected to their penis. And they would also have a dial. So like when they're watching a certain kind of like video, they can turn the dial to like, if it's a 10, oh, that's really hot. I'm really into that. Like, love what I'm seeing. And the device is also measuring, are they getting erect or not?
Interesting. Okay.
And so that's how they got the data of like, you know, if it's a 10, but no erection, arousal non-concordance. If they're watching a video and they're like, hell no, don't like that at all, but they're erect, arousal non-concordance.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, no, I don't even know where I'm pulling this research from, but I have heard that even during a sexual assault that women still get wet.
Yeah.
And so unfortunately that your assaulter, your predator, may take that as she wants it.
Yes.
But whereas the victim is like, no, hell no, this is not what I want.
People do take it that way. Like, well, they were erect, they were wet. That means that they wanted it. Yeah. You cannot go based on that. And the same goes for reverse. I mean, I've heard, I'll speak about men here real quick in my experience. But let's say their wife has difficulty getting wet. It's easy for a man to take that as like, I'm not pleasing her. She doesn't really want to have sex with me. She's not attracted to me. She's not. And I have to kind of get that education of like, it doesn't mean that at all. You know, it's really about the communication you have. You can have a conversation because they may be so into you and they may think you're the fucking hottest thing on the planet. And sometimes their body just isn't going to cooperate. Use lube, move forward.
Okay.
Don't even focus on intercourse if you don't need to. But yeah, people will really read into that, and you can't be so I thought about that when you said, you know, when people question like men can't really be raped, they absolutely can, and it happens to them. And so I think if we're looking at the world like sex positivity and feminism, it definitely benefits too, and men deserve what women are asking for too, right?
Yeah. I learned a new term here, guys. Arousal non-concordance.
That was a majority of the educational content that was important for me to mention, but I'm curious, did you have anything else that you found that was interesting?
But no, I do want to touch a little bit before we go on just the fact, I mean, we've been talking about it throughout, but I did want to define sex negativity a little bit. For those of you who don't know, sex negativity is defined as a mindset that sex is inherently dirty or dangerous or risky or deviant, depending on, you know, how you were brought up. And I can understand where it's rooted. It's rooted in the fact that, you know, we want to protect ourselves from the dangers of sex, like, you know, disease, exploitation, things like that. However, sex negativity, which, by the way, U.S. is very much rooted in, this is how we are, which kind of, you brought that up when we were talking about the evolution. It just makes it to where you're restricted in this little tiny box. And here in the U.S., in order for sex to be acceptable, it has to be heterosexual. It has to be monogamous. It has to be age appropriate. And typically, you should be doing it during marriage, you know.
Yeah, it has to be in the context of marriage,
Yeah. And that's such a little limiting box that I think that's one of the powers of the sex positivity movement, is that it's much more inclusive, which I love.
Well, yeah, you're right. The U.S. is rooted in sex negativity, and religion plays a big part in that. And I'm not saying that if anyone who's listening is religious, I am not saying this to offend whatever religion you have. I'm just speaking to experience here. When I have clients who are currently religious or maybe used to be religious, and sex is very much in the context of, heterosexual, within marriage, usually with the purpose of having children, and everything that you mentioned. What usually happens, well, there's a few things that can happen. One, people get married really young because they just want to have sex already.
Yes.
They do. They get married. They get married.
True.
They get married right out of high school. It's like, I have these urges. I want to fuck now. So let's get married today.
And now it's okay.
And now it's okay. Yeah. So they get married. They had all the fun. They start having kids. They look at their partner and they're like, I don't even really like you that much anymore. Because we were so young when we got married.
Yeah.
So then you feel kind of stuck because you also shouldn't get divorced. And so that's really tough, right? Like, I'm not saying every person who gets married young ends up having that problem, but a lot of times they do.
Okay.
So that's one possibility. Another one is that sex is so shamed until you get married. It's like shame, 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 repress, don't do that. If you have an urge, ignore it. Masturbation is bad. Yeah. You should not be touching your part. Like you're awful, right? It's like so shamed. And then you get married and it's like, okay, now it's acceptable. Mm. And it's like, it's not a light switch. Yep. I can't go from feeling ashamed about wanting to have sex and then shoving it down to like my wedding night. Now I want to get freaky and do all the fun stuff. It doesn't really work like that, you know? So I've heard stories of, on our wedding night, it was like really awkward and uncomfortable. And for a lot of women, painful. So whenever sex is shamed, leading up to marriage, and then suddenly it's okay, it isn't really like a light switch, I still feel dirty and gross and not okay and I'm uncomfortable. And that kind of anxiety, it is connected with sexual pain, right? And so I have clients where when there's like vaginismus or physical pain or tightening of the muscles and it makes it hard to have intercourse. A lot of it is psychological and it can be rooted in that shame and anxiety. So lots of sex negative, there is a lot of negative effect that can take a long time to process and overcome.
Oh, and I feel a very popular show that's going on right now that everyone seems to be glamorizing is Bridgerton, right? Where you do glamorize women solely being used for procreation and marriage, and we're more as property and the men of the house. So it does glamorize those roles, but it does also bring light to sex in the bedroom where women just kind of lay there. And I mean, obviously you have the main characters who it seems like they engage in really nice intercourse, but you do have those scenes where the woman is just expected to lay there as the guy just kind of just goes to town, and it's not meant to be pleasurable for her. It's meant for her to be able to procreate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So not an exciting experience.
No, which is so interesting. But before we wrap the episode up, is there anything you want to leave the audience as far as like our prompt is the history of sex positivity and how it affects or impacts society and men? Yeah.
Really, what I want to leave people with is just to always be curious. That's the biggest piece of advice I can give. If something is uncomfortable to you, if something doesn't make sense to you, if something makes you angry, that's not wrong. Just be curious. Why is that? Right? Challenge it a little bit. Get some information about yourself, about history, about society, and you can learn a lot about that. And you can enhance your own sex life and your own sexual experiences by being curious. That's going to give you the knowledge to be able to show up honestly and to feel confident about what you want, don't like. And I think that gives a better experience for everyone involved.
No, I completely agree with that. Yeah, that's a really good way to summarize it. Actually, I want to share a little story. So doing the research, and by the way, guys, like Lindsay said, resources are going to be down below. She came with the more, obviously, this being her profession, she has the more educated things. I used YouTube, Wikipedia, Google as far as my research options, so bear with me. But I did come across this beautiful article from a guy named Charlie Glickman, who I guess wrote The Language of Sex Positivity, which I absolutely love. So he has this excerpt, and I'm going to read it to you guys. And it's about food, but we're going to just bear with me. All right. So try to imagine the following world. Accurate information about food is freely available and exists for all ages in appropriate ways. Talking about what sorts of foods you like and negotiating with the dinner partner is a simple and relaxed experience. Different preferences, whether personal or cultural, are important for the information they provide and are no more or less important than hair color or family history, unless people are trying to figure out what to eat together. Some people prefer to eat with the same person indefinitely. Others prefer to eat in a group, and still others eat with a variety of partners as the mood suits them, and nobody is ever forced to eat anything or with anyone. Each person is an expert in their own desires and needs around food, and their choices are respected. So obviously, this is the concept we have around food in general. This is our society. Have you heard this excerpt, by the way?
I have not, but I love it. I love it, yeah.
I'm going to read it again, but I'm going to substitute the word food for sex, and I'm going to substitute eat for having sex or have sex, right? So try to imagine the following world. Accurate information about sex is freely available and exists for all ages in appropriate ways. Talking about what sorts of sex you like and negotiating with a dinner partner is a simple and relaxed experience. Different preferences, whether personal or cultural, are important for the information they provide and are no more or less important than hair color or family history, unless people are trying to figure out how to have sex together. Some people prefer to have sex with the same person indefinitely. Others prefer to have sex in a group. And still others have sex with a variety of partners as the mood suits them, and nobody is ever forced to have sex with anyone. Each person is an expert in their desires and needs around sex, and their choices are respected.
I love it. I've never heard that before. That's so good.
I found that and I was like, wow, because you can imagine the food portion. That's a world you can imagine, no problem.
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of the world we have already in general. But when you substitute sex for food, which obviously I know it's not a complete substitution, it makes it to where, yeah, the conversation should be open, free. And I mean, we shouldn't have any shame whether you want to have sex with one person indefinitely, whether you don't want to have sex at all,
right?
You have the asexual community, or if you want to have sex with a bunch of different partners, it should be freely discussed, and there should be appropriate education on it.
It makes me think of well, going back to food example, but if it's like, if you don't like pineapples on your pizza, it's okay not to like pineapples on your pizza, but it's not okay to go, no one should ever have pineapples on their pizza.
Damn, you know what I mean?
Right? Like, that's what it's like.
I love it.
And there's a sex educator named Midori. I don't know if you ever heard of her, but I've attended some trainings with her. So I have a slight connection to her. I don't know her personally, but I think she's amazing. But like I said, sex educator, expert on like rope play. But I've heard this phrase from her, but she says, don't yuck someone's yum.
Agreed. I love that. Yes, I love that. Is that where that phrase came from?
I don't know if she's the one that came up with it, but I've heard her say it several times,
love it.
And it is so good. And
yes.
It's like that. It's the same with food and same with sex. Don't yuck someone's yum.
Agreed. Well, guys, I feel like we left you with some good info here today. It was good. I feel like we provided value. So if we did, please let me know. Put it in the comments, DM us, whatever.
Yeah, definitely give us a follow. We have more episodes to come. And feel free to message us too. I mean, we appreciate feedback or ideas of topics that you might want to hear in the future.
Yes.
We are all about that because we want to give you the content that is going to interest you the most and help you learn the most. So we're here for it.
Yeah, again, guys, this podcast is basically, we want to start a conversation on sex and be able to engage. So please engage with us and let us know, like, what are topics you want to learn about, or what are discussions that you want to hear out loud that you haven't heard before. So please, please engage with us.
Yeah. All right, everyone. So thanks for listening in. We can't wait to have you listen to our next episode and topics to come. And remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.